Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us, the Project Censored radio show. We're very glad to be joined once again on the show by Jacqueline Luqman, who is the co-host of the radio show By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik with Sean Blackman. She is the moderator of Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ and a member of the church's Board of Social Action, an organizer with the Black Alliance for Peace and with Pan-African Community Action in Washington, D.C. Jackie, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Jackie, I wanted to ask you on the show here because I wanted to dig into some things that you talk about a lot and start off particularly with this one little tidbit, because we are recording this a couple of days just before Martin Luther King Day. And I can only assume that there will be a scourge of racist, capitalist, imperialist douche canoes quoting Dr. King. And I just wanted to share this one little nugget from last year, actually. The FBI, ladies and gentlemen, tweeted out, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, quote, "Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?" End quote. This MLK Day and every day, the FBI remains dedicated to service and committed to protecting our communities. I have a hard time saying that without actually laughing and vomiting at the same time. Jackie, could you take us through just a little bit of this remarkably twisted irony here?
It really is remarkably twisted, because let's not ever forget, for people who don't know, that the FBI was the architect and the implementer of a little program called COINTELPRO, which spied on left activists, anti-war activists, student activists, Vietnam era anti-war activists, and most notably the American Indian movement and Black liberation organizations and leaders. That would include Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. under the purview of J. Edgar Hoover, who got his career started in the then named Bureau of Investigation, because it wasn't a federal agency then. He actually started his career surveilling and eventually setting up to be deported Marcus Garvey of the Universal Negro Improvement Association through this mail fraud scheme. And what did Marcus Garvey do to deserve this? He just wanted Black people throughout the diaspora to be an independent nation, outside of this empire that had abused, subjugated, oppressed, enslaved, all of that, Africans throughout the diaspora. So he wasn't just talking about the United States, he was also talking about the colonies of the US ally and the former largest imperialist nation, the United Kingdom, because he was from Jamaica. So he understood the dangers or the horrors of colonization when it came to African descended people. So J. Edgar Hoover not only made his bones in the Federal Bureau, the Bureau of Investigation in the early years, he built an entire career off of surveilling what he described as threats to the American way. He believed that Black nationalist and Black liberation groups were looking for the emergence of a Black Messiah to lead them out from under the watchful, paternalistic eye of American exceptionalism, which we were never looking for a Messiah. We were just looking for a way out. and that's all that was. But, the empires can never give up its subjects. So when you think of the FBI in the modern era, I want, and in the context of Martin Luther King Jr. or any other radical Black leader that the FBI can somehow claim to honor, I want people to immediately think of COINTELPRO. And remember that it was the FBI that surveilled Martin Luther King Jr. wiretapped his phones, sent him letters telling him that he should kill himself, sent his wife tape recordings that alleged to be Dr. King having an affair with another woman. For the record, Mrs. Coretta Scott King has always said that those recordings were bullshit and bogus, but people still want to believe that that was true. I am going to take the word of Mrs. Coretta Scott King and claim and call them bogus. But this is what the FBI did. So when the FBI, excuse me, and by the way, the King family actually sued the FBI, I believe, a few years ago. And although the outcome of the lawsuit, and it was a civil suit, was not to directly implicate the FBI in the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which is what people were looking for, because come on now, you don't put all that effort into surveilling people, writing up suicide letters and making fake tapes about affairs and sending them to your spouse. You don't do all of that, spend all of that money and resources and effort just to let somebody be like, okay, well, we've done enough. No, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated because he began to have or express more radical views away from capitalism. He began to speak publicly against the war in Vietnam. And he began to speak publicly about the need to reallocate funds for the redistribution of the massive wealth in this country to go to the poor. That sounds a lot like socialism to me, because that's what he was talking about. He literally, Dr. King wrote in a letter to his then fiance, Coretta Scott. And I just find that this is one of the most romantic things I've ever read in my life, that he writes to her as they were courting, as they were dating. I guess you know that my views are more socialistic than most. And he starts talking about the need to redistribute wealth. And this is long before the Beyond Vietnam speech and before he was a member or before he was the leader of the civil rights movement that he was chosen to do. This is when he was dating Coretta Scott King, or Coretta Scott. So Martin Luther King Jr. always seemed to have had an alternative view of this American system in regard to the working class and the poor, particularly Black people. He understood very early that it didn't work for us, but there was no reason for it not to work, because if the same system could spend all the money that it was spending in Vietnam by the time he's talking about the Vietnam War, because during the entire civil rights era, he didn't speak out against the war. He was focused on desegregation. He was focused on ending Jim Crow. He was focused on, societal equality or equality of access for Black people. But the Vietnam War created a crisis of conscience, I think, for someone who understood that the resources that were being sent out of this country to fight people who are also oppressed by neocolonial imperialism, the French in Vietnam were trying to regain their colonies, and he understood that that was connected to the imperialism here in the United States, where this country still had not done right by its formerly enslaved population. He recognized that he could not, in good conscience, ignore that while people were fighting against him, because let's be clear, Martin Luther King Jr. was not popular when he was doing all of this. He was not popular in the American population. If you look at polls from that period of time, Over 60% of the people in this country polled said that he was stirring up trouble, that he was doing too much, that he was making things worse. So he was, people in this country were not like, oh, we love Martin Luther King Jr. And that, no, they weren't. They wanted that man to shut up and go away. And all he was doing was dealing with Jim Crow and integration. But it really broke the straw that broke the camel's back for not just the American population, but for the empire itself, was when he began to speak out against the Vietnam War and to condemn, to critique and condemn capitalism and the way that capitalism works together with racism to perpetuate militarism that continues to keep an already oppressed group of people who have been historically oppressed to continue to keep them oppressed. He was making those connections that the empire didn't want him to make. So he was assassinated at that point in his public career, not because of the sit-ins, not because of the I have a dream speech that everybody likes to quote, that people only quote that part of the speech, but they don't pay any attention to anything else he said in that speech, which do contain nuggets of the very condemnation of capitalism and militarism and racism, the triple evils that he called them. Nobody ever talks about those. So to believe that the FBI that is tweeting, and I think they did it again, they're about to do it again this year, because they're really on that woke imperialism bullshit that they're doing. For the FBI to honor Martin Luther King Jr., someone that they undoubtedly had a hand in assassinating, and that goes back to the court case, because although the evidence did not point directly to implicating the FBI, I believe the judge in the case pointed out that, yeah, the FBI is guilty of a whole lot of stuff, and I would not put it past them to be implicated in King's assassination, but there is no evidence to directly implicate them in his assassination. So where there's smoke, there's fire. So the FBI honoring Dr. Martin Luther King is literally like a serial killer who took the life of your sister, sending you a birthday card saying, thinking of her on her birthday. That's how sick and twisted this is.
Yeah, absolutely, Jackie. And I really appreciate you creating that context about the connecting of issues, because that's another thing that I wanted to discuss, because as you pointed out, he was murdered shortly after connecting those issues. And there's actually a good book by Dr. William F. Pepper called "The Plot to Kill King," which talks a lot about this and about how the FBI created a fall guy and all of that, all of those details. It's an incredibly detailed book that goes through all this. But with regards to that, I'm also curious because there's a lot of focus on Dr. King, rightfully so, in the U.S. in terms of these movements. But it also seems that if you start digging, to me, as somebody who's not Black and started digging from an outside perspective, these threads, these connective threads, are a huge part of Black organizing. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like these threads that are connected that Dr. King picked up and like brought to the spotlight, but how are these connective issues part of Black organizing during King's time, but also today?
I mean, the thing is that it is difficult to believe, but it's absolutely true, is that all of the things, excuse me, that Dr. King was analyzing and raising in his public life, in his political career, are still issues that we are dealing with today. That's the thing that is so incredibly important for us to keep in mind as organizers when we approach this day in particular, because the empire whitewashed his image. Like I said, all we hear throughout this holiday weekend is that this is Martin Luther King Jr. was a man of peace, and that and the quote that you said, that the most important thing you can do for someone else is what you can do for them. So the empire went so far as to, and I think it was 1994, and I had to pull up my research here, that every other national holiday for every other public figure, people can just have a day off. You know, all the former presidents, all the former slaveholding presidents, they're all wrapped up into one day now. But I mean, basically, people just get a day off and mind their business, and you do whatever. Not Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. In, I think it was 1994, the United States Congress passed a decree that designated Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday as a day of service. They officially did this to, I hate to sound like that kind of conspiratorial person, but I don't see that they have done this for any other holiday in this country, honoring a person. But it sure is funny that this Congress of millionaires, and mostly white people, found it necessary to pass a piece of legislation to tell the people who have been pushing for a federal holiday to honor this man who meant so much to our struggle for liberation, that no, you can't just have a day off. This is what you are going to do to honor him. We're going to tell you what you're going to do to honor him. You are going to engage in a day of service. You're not just going to have a day off. And you'll hear people, radio announcers, and sadly, way too many Black people do this. They've bought into this, but this is how effective and how all encompassing the propaganda that comes from this empire is. Most people don't even know that this idea of a day of service around Martin Luther King Jr.'s day comes from a congressional decree. But we've adopted it as, well, this must be something that King wanted us to do because, after all, he was a man of service. Well, when you look at what Dr. King actually said when he talked about the pressing issues facing Black people in particular, but all working class and poor people generally in this country, and this government's role and what it should do to address these issues, King said things like this, and I have to read these quotes directly because I don't want to get them wrong, because it is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., by the way, so I'm not gonna mess with that. So he said about capitalism in particular, we have deluded ourselves into believing the myth that capitalism grew and prospered out of the Protestant ethic of hard work and sacrifice. This is a man who is a Christian Baptist pastor calling BS on this Protestant work ethic stuff. He said, the fact is that capitalism was built on the exploitation and suffering of Black slaves and continues to thrive on the exploitation of the poor, Black and white, here and abroad. If Negroes and poor whites do not participate in the free flow of wealth within our economy, they will forever be poor, giving their energies, their talents, and their limited funds to the consumer market, but reaping few benefits and services in return. The way to end poverty is to end the exploitation of the poor, ensure them a fair share of the government services and the nation's resources. He said this to the Negro American Labor Council in 1961. So here we are in 2023, and the conversations around socialism and the exploitation and the poor and the heightened interrogation of the utility of capitalism, people examining more what exactly capitalism is, and does it really benefit everyone? People are, of course, attributing this heightened conversation in this country to the campaigns of Bernie Sanders, and that's fine. But for us organizers, for us African organizers, we understand these interrogations came from people, not just him, but were popularized to a certain degree by Martin Luther King Jr. And it was because he was having these conversations in a capitalist nation about capitalism doesn't work for everyone. And oh, by the way, the lies that you tell people about if you work hard, if you have that Protestant work ethic, then capitalism can work for you. That's garbage. That's what got him in trouble with the state. He was already considered an enemy of the state because he was deemed a Black messiah to lead the Black masses out from under the apron springs of the benevolence of, you know, American exceptionalism, or Americanism rather. So he was already in their crosshairs. But then when he began to have these public conversations about what this system really is and what the relationship to this system that Black people, working class and poor, Black and white people domestically and internationally really have, then that's when he needed to be silenced. Something else he said that he talked about that we face today. Dr. King visited Harlem in 1964 when a police officer killed 15-year-old James Powell. King called for a civilian review board that would make police accountable to the public. Now, for us today, especially as members of Pan-African Community Action, we are advocates of community control over the police. And that means that the community controls the apparatus of public safety, from hiring cops to reviewing them to firing them, discipline, all of that. What King was advocating wasn't quite CCOP, but it was closer to it than I think most people were thinking about at the time. But just like today, when we talk about community control over any of our institutions in our communities, because we believe in Pan-African Community Action, that the people who live in the community should control all of the institutions in our communities: police, school, food, public health, public safety, everything. And of course, we get a lot of pushback, a lot of criticism from that. But guess what? So did Dr. King. He absolutely did. He was criticized by local politicians in Harlem who ran him out of town for his comments. And that happened 50 years ago. Let's see, what else are we? Militarism. How can I forget that? King said quite a lot about militarism. And let me find the quote I'm looking for. He spoke a lot in his Beyond Vietnam speech about how the United States at the time was spending an obscene amount of money in 1967 measures on killing a bunch of brown people, or killing a bunch of, sometimes he did call them, you know, yellow, but he meant the Vietnamese people, killing a bunch of poor peasants whose only crime was refusing to continue to be subjugated by the French. They refused to continue to be colonized by the French, and they did not want to be ruled by a dictator who was propped up by the French and the United States government. So their only crime was not wanting capitalism and imperialist rule. So King talked very much about how the money that was used to wage the war in Vietnam, where most of the soldiers in the United States were sent disproportionately from Black, Latino, and poor white communities, sent them overseas to kill people who just did not want to be subjugated by capitalism and imperialism, only to have those American men come back to this country and continue to face the capitalist imperialist subjugation and inequality that money that went to Vietnam could have and should have been used to address the issues facing the poor and working class. So he absolutely called for the reallocation of funds, the end to US militarism, because it was militarism, racism, and sorry, edit that out. I had a little brain freeze there. So it was the evils of militarism and racism and poverty that continue to perpetuate the oppression of working class and poor people in this country. So he was calling for an end to not just the Vietnam War, but an end to war spending in the United States in general, because the United States has always spent more, well, maybe not always, probably since World War II, spent more money on so-called defense than it has spent on social programs, on what King called social uplift programs, poverty reducing programs. Imagine how much more true that is today, Eleanor, as the United States has just spent over $100 billion, sent $100 billion in some form or another to Ukraine, a country that is not only used as a proxy agent in the US, EU, NATO war against Russia, but a country that is also a fascist country. We can't get around that. We cannot get around the fact that this government, with a domestic law enforcement, a domestic federal law enforcement agency that is honoring Martin Luther King Jr., which is itself a fascist agency because it's within a fascist government. The US is a fascist government. This government is sending boatloads of money to a government in Ukraine that has banned labor unions, that has now outlawed an entire religion, that has stripped citizenship of priests, that has shut down opposition television stations and newspapers, has outlawed, made it illegal for opposition political parties to exist, and that absolutely does have far-right elements in the parliament making these decisions, and has formally incorporated quite a few thousand literal neo-Nazis in their army. So if we cannot see that what Dr. King was talking about in 65, 66, 67, 68, when he talked about the triple evils of racism, poverty, and militarism, if we cannot make these connections today, then we're not the revolutionaries we claim to be. Because we have to understand that King was assassinated because of his radical views for how to change this society from the exploitative, capitalist, settler colonial, white supremacist, patriarchal, militaristic behemoth that it already was and was well on its way to becoming much worse. He was talking about that then. And it was dangerous to the point that it cost him his life. So it's our responsibility as organizers, as African organizers, to carry on that legacy of the radical Dr. King and continue to raise these issues, regardless of the ideological pushback we get even from those poor deluded people on the left who think that siding with the empire in this issue of the militarism in regard to Ukraine is a righteous thing because they've been indoctrinated to hate Russia so much. And that's a whole nother conversation, but yeah.
It is indeed, but and a very vital one. But it's yes, there's so many offshoots from this because Dr. King combined so many issues and really placed them under that singular umbrella of U.S. empire. And I kind of want to uh, wrap up here with this idea of, because the FBI is still, I mean, COINTELPRO didn't end, it just shifted. FBI still very much spies on, infiltrates, and tries to kill leftist movements, and has just very recently, like, raided Pan-African offices, and of course continues to spy on anyone even loosely related with anything like Black Lives Matter or things like that. And so Dr. King was a very large target for them because he was, he was very easy to aim at, literally and figuratively. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts as an organizer on having a kind of like a singular leader like this that they can label, like a Black Messiah, and not just from outside danger, but also in terms of an inside organizing perspective? What are your thoughts on having a kind of like singular person like that?
I think that's one of the lessons that um, African organizers, excuse me, have learned, that, and that, as I said before, we're not looking for a Messiah, um, because that this kind of a singular focus on one person, on a Moses to lead us out of the wilderness of the trap that is America. That's a very, I think, immature and outdated kind of view of African organizing, or any organizing. And to be honest, for us, our focus is, and should be for those who are watching who maybe haven't thought of this, our focus really should not be on individuals, because, and I'm not saying this in the context of Dr. King. I'm saying this in the context of, this is just how human beings kind of are. When you when you when you focus all of your organizational efforts on what one person says you should or should not do, you can create a cult of personality, and you might lose focus of your actual mission. Your mission should be liberation. It should be the examination and the critique and the condemnation of capitalism, the focus toward building the alternative of socialism, to address the insufficiencies and the exploitations of capitalism, providing political education around those issues, also connecting the material conditions that people face, police brutality, income inequality, healthcare disparities, all of these kinds of climate issues, all of these things that people are grappling with, struggling with, facing and drowning under today. We need to focus on connecting those issues that people are actually facing to the solution of socialism. We need to be talking about capitalism creates these problems, and this is why, helping people understand that, and then helping people understand why socialism is the answer to those problems. And we need to be raising consciousness about internationalism, because it is no accident that people around the world, working class, poor, peasant, indigenous, Afro-descended people around the world, particularly in the global South and in some places on the continent of Africa, are engaged in a pitched struggle, an intense struggle for their self-determination and their land and their human rights against right-wing governments and their connected forces that are always backed by the United States and its allies. It is not a mistake that we don't hear in corporate media about those struggles, about those massive protests against NATO in European countries. We're not hearing in corporate media about the general strike in Peru, the protests in Brazil. We're not hearing about the attempted assassination, another one, of Francia Marquez in Colombia, and the continued struggle against the resurgent right wing in that country that wants to take it back for the US empire and its friends. These things are important for us to know because their struggles are connected to our struggles. What they're fighting against is the exact same thing that we are fighting against, only internationally. The issues, the details of the issues may look different, but they're the exact same issues: police brutality or military abuse, income inequality, entrenched poverty, land theft, climate change catastrophe that is concentrated among the poor and peasant class. Same things we face. So the empire does not want us to be connected to those people in those struggles. But there is no way we win against the empire we live in unless we connect with the people who are the recipients of the foreign policies that come from this empire, just like we're the recipients of the domestic policy that are created in this empire. So those things need to be our focus. Our focus needs to be on the issues we are fighting, how we fight them, what our solutions are, what we can do to struggle toward those solutions. How do we win battles along the way? The people were just able to recognize a major victory in Baltimore with Keith Davis Jr. having the charges dropped against him after former state's attorney Marilyn Mosby prosecuted him 7 times, trying to get him convicted of a crime he did not commit. That was a victory that the people won. And that kind of struggle needs to be popularized among working class and poor people. Those kinds of victories need to be internalized so that we can always have that revolutionary hope and optimism that we can win. Because if we do all those things, Eleanor, if we focus on all of those things, if we interrogate and condemn capitalism, if we understand what socialism is and apply it, find ways to, and we don't have to look hard, see how socialism can address all of our issues and struggle towards socialism, and do it in the context of international solidarity and struggle, we will win. But we will not win focusing on a messiah internally, and we certainly won't win being national isolationists in any context.
Yeah, beautifully put. And I think there's so much there. And I feel like, I know I could sit and talk to you for hours, but sadly there's, the radio stations are not ours yet.
Soon though, soon.
Soon. Yes. But Jackie, thank you so much for giving so much context and tying so many things together. And I think that leaving this with that feeling and that note of international solidarity is so important. And Jackie, tell folks where they can find more of your work and follow what you're doing.
Oh, Lord, where am I not? So you can listen to By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik on the web, anytime, anywhere in the world at sputniknews.com. Click on the little white headphones at the upper right of the screen at 2:00 Eastern Time each weekday, and you'll hear myself and Sean Blackman talk to some amazing movement people, organizers, activists, radicals, and talk about how they are engaged in this struggle. That's sputniknews.com, 2:00 each weekday, 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern time. If you miss our live show, you can catch our previous shows at sputniknews.com/radio. Scroll down the page and click on our show By Any Means Necessary. All our previous shows are there. You can support Luqman Nation and find the transcripts and some expanded content of my monologues that I do every day on Patreon. And that's patreon.com/Luqman Nation, LUQMANNATION. Warning, I can cuss there, so sometimes I do. You can also find me on Black Power Media. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday morning. This is on YouTube, Black Power Media on YouTube, on the Remix Morning Show from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern Time. That's Black Power Media on YouTube. And you can also hang out in Luqman Nation on YouTube, Luqman Nation on YouTube, or under the Black Power Media banner at some given time. Like today, I'm having a great conversation with Ajamu Baraka about left collusion with the empire, and very excited about it. Lots and lots of cuss words probably going to happen, but very great conversation. I do shows there also. So just look for Luqman Nation under Black Power Media, and subscribe to Black Power Media so you can check out whenever I or anybody else on the platform goes live. I'm on Twitter, Luqman Nation, the number one, LUQMANNATION, the number one, and Facebook, Luqman Nation. And sadly, I am being forced to be more active on Instagram. So yes, I'm on the gram too, Luqman Nation 1 also. That's everywhere, everywhere. That's good grief.
I mean, that's impressive. You really are everywhere. And for folks listening, if you haven't heard Jackie's monologues at the beginning of By Any Means Necessary, do yourself a favor and go listen to them, because they are brilliant and powerful. And you want to break things and also like plant a bunch of things at the same time when you listen to it. It's beautiful.
Well, that's dope. Thank you so much. I am so tickled by that. Thank you.
Oh, they're wonderful. I love it. Well, thank you again, Jackie, so much for joining us and giving us that very important insight.
Many thanks for having me. Appreciate you. Always good to hang out with you.